today I have an after-action report and discussion on gameplay for Donnerschlag, Escape from Stalingrad, a game by Patrick Gebhardt and Pepito Shazaguti. If I mispronounced those names, I apologize. This game was actually sent to me by Mr. Gebhardt, so thank you for that. Appreciate it. I enjoyed, did some coverage on that on the unboxing and overview, and that is in the comments down below or in the description of this video down below. But let's get into the actual game play and actually the after action report of where I ended up in this game. You can see this is the box, very nice thick box, nice cover there. This is the layout at the end of the game pretty much. I've moved some stuff around as I was going over things and preparing to discuss some of the gameplay. But the game basically starts, the Germans start in the south here, or not in the south, but on this side of the board here, and they are trying to get to one of these meeting points, which are kind of the zones to relieve the Germans that are trapped in the Stalingrad, or kind of surrounded in the Stalingrad pocket up here. You need to get to one of these three zones before the end of the game. The game is 7 to 8 turns, depending upon some cards. You have to get some forces in there before and be in supply before the end of the game. And if you don't, then you lose. So it's an all or nothing type scenario. The Germans are trying to move up this direction on the board, and the Russians or the Soviets start off with some forces down here, some forces in the middle, very few, and then they have reinforcements that come on the board. They have, most of their forces are up here, and they have more reinforcements that come on the board during the game and trying to get to block off the Germans. As I said, this is not exactly the game state at the end. I was moving stuff around and trying to figure out some stuff as I went along. The way this game ended up is I was able to get the Germans into meeting zone C. At some point during the game, you're going to decide when you want to do the Donnerschlag advance, which is basically the rescue attempt. And when you do that, you're going to put this counter on this track here, and this is going to move up each turn. Then if it gets to 4, if you're not there by the end of the 4, then the game ends as well. So you kind of have some decision on when you want to start that. If you start it too late, I mean, you're not going to have as many turns to get it done on the game track down below here. And when you do that, not only do you put this on the board and it starts the clock ticking, but you're also going to choose these meeting zones, and 2 of them are dummies, and 1 of them is the real meeting zone, and the other side does not know that. The Soviets do not know that. Only the German knows which zone they are going to. And so that's what happened here. Zone C was picked, and the Germans really cleared out a corridor here and pushing the Russians back so they weren't blocking there. Because if you have a zone of control overlap your supply line, then you can end up having a be out of supply. So they basically, the Germans were kind of protecting their supply line and kind of went up the top side of it, looking at the board this way, the top side of the board. This board is basically a long board, kind of meant to be played. Well, you can play it this way or you can play it long ways. It's kind of the text and everything is facing in its portrait position that way, up and down. I'm filming it this way so I can get more of the board on the screen. The Soviets are trying to, figure out, protect. They kind of have to play zone defense. They have to figure out, protect all 3 of these zones, especially as the Germans get closer here. But at some point, there's usually a break point right around here where you know which direction the Germans are going to go, and you need to move your forces in that direction accordingly. Now, to move your forces is not a guarantee. This isn't a I go, you go system where you just automatically move your forces. You need to use these activation cards. These are what lets you move your forces forward. You can activate either all the units or whole division. You know, there's this color bands that are on the cards here. Let's see if I can see one. Like these are the 6th Panzer here. This is the 6th Panzer headquarters there. And so you can activate the 6th Panzer Division and activate, you know, all of everything in the 6th Panzer Division. Or you can activate, like this is the Romanian Cavalry, or you can activate this unit here. So these cards are going to determine what you can activate and when you can activate it. For example, you know, I can activate, this is the 23rd Panzer, or you can activate this element of it, which are these right here. These right here, if you can see, they're on the bottom of the, my lighting's not the best today because the sun is not out. You have that element there, so you can activate them as well. So the Germans basically have 2 choices at activation generally. The Russians have 3 choices of activation on what they can do. Sometimes it's units of one color from one army, or all units from one formation. Yeah, that was formations that I was trying to talk about there. There are 2 armies for the Russians, or the Soviets. I keep calling them Russians. For the Soviets that are on the board, there's 2 different armies. So usually you're picking, you know, all from one or other of the army on most of your activations, but these cards can vary. 1 headquarter or 1 formation. So if you activate a headquarters, then you can activate units within the range of that headquarters and move them along. Blue units of 1 army, again, that's going to be based on this band here. So these have certain bands that are on there that you can see right there. So that's how you do activation. You're going to get 5 of these cards. There's cards that can basically up your activation. Let me a little more light here. There's some cards that can up your activation. So you start off with 5 activation limit, but you can actually get up to a 6-card activation limit. Also, you're going to be holding combat cards. I'll talk about those in a second, but you have combat cards that you play during the game. You start off with 5, but you can get up to 6 on those. The activation, though, basically determines kind of the turn, because when you run out of activation cards, the turn track's going to advance. There are some points on the turn track where you can pick out a card out of the deck and use in kind of a pre-select what you're going to use for an activation. That comes at certain points of the game. And then there's a early and late cards that you will shuffle into the game. You know, this is like an early card there, and then there are some late cards that come into the game as well. Those come in at a certain point during the game, and you'll put those in the deck, and now you have your late activations. The same is true for combat cards, and the same is true for both combat and activation for the Soviets. I got it right this time. So activation is not a guarantee. You've got to make some selections of how you want to do it. One of the things I found interesting is when you do like just the color bands, they're all over the board. Not all your color bands are in one group. You know, you're used to playing probably, Napoleonic games or Civil War games. You know, all the bands are of a division or a brigade, and they're all together. They're all over the board here. So that's what makes the activation a little bit chaotic, because you might be moving if you want to do just all the blue bands, one might be here, one might be here, one might be over here, and of one army. And so usually the red are up here and the tan are down here for the Soviets, starting off generally. So it's all over the board. So it's not so easy for the Russians to run to one of these 3 areas and block it off. It takes a little bit of planning and trying to get your activations right. I don't know if that was trying to simulate the chaos of command or the breakdown in the Soviet structure of command, but the Germans, with just 2 different commands, and I found the command cards a little bit easier to get your forces moving in the right direction. Even with that, I still had some forces, hanging out down here because I just couldn't get them to bring them to bear based on the activations that were coming up. Then you have combat cards or event cards that come into play. That are multi-use. Again, these are early and late, but there's also, there's like a general event, and you have to roll a dice to use this before activation. Sometimes these get kicked out of the game when you use it. Sometimes there's a tactical event that you use in combat. They're used before combat. They'll tell you when you can use it, whether it's activation or combat, or whether it's just before combat, and it gives you a bonus like a shift, and it might discard after play. So there's a lot of gameplay in these cards, and what you get. So there's a lot of replayability there, and making the decisions of how to use these cards. So there's some card management there and trying to use them on the board. They also bring in some other resources. As I said, there's some different activations and cards and stuff that make a change. There's also one thing that kind of confused me is how you get the tank reinforcements. There's basically 3 cups there's a German cup. Of course, I using my Bilderberg cup there. You have a tank cup for tank reinforcement for the Soviet tank reinforcements and Soviet infantry reinforcements. So there's 3 cups. Those are dictated by, 2 of those cups are dictated by combat. Combat is relatively straightforward, other than the play of the cards and how that shifts stuff. There's also combined arms, combining, tanks with infantry or motorized units can give you some benefits, and that's all laid out on the different charts that you have. But the combat results table is relatively standard. It's a odds table with either attacker or defender retreat or a loss of step. And then, you only have, 1 and below and 6 and above. If you roll, if the Axis or the Germans attack and the Soviets, if the Germans attack and roll a 1, then the Soviets get to pull from their infantry cup and get to add a infantry reinforcement onto the board. So that's what an infantry reinforcement looks like there. There's also a snafu in here, which means they don't get anything this turn. So I think might be 2 in this cup and 1 in the tank cup. And there's also 1 or 2 in the German cup as well. So that's how infantry reinforcements come on the board based on a roll of the combat. If the Soviets attack and there's a roll of 6 or more on this, then the Germans get to add a unit from their alarm cup. This is kind of the alarm here, and these are small units, but they only have like 1 on there. But the beauty of these is if you see those little triangles or those little diamonds that are kind of stacked through, that means that unit does not count against stacking. Basically, you have like generally a 2 unit stacking rule. But some of those units don't, like headquarters and those units don't add to stacking. So even though they're kind of small, they do add up and affect gameplay if you can build up some of those. But those 2 just come in on rolls on the combat table. I really couldn't figure out where the Soviets came in until I found these cards here that basically this card here says 1 Panzer Battalion. So that's giving you, of course, it has some conditions. Of course, most of these cards have conditions that you have to roll, but that gives you a Panzer Battalion. So that's when you draw from this cup. Not clear in the rules at all. I'll talk about the rules in a second when I kind of do my overview, but there's like 3 of these cards that have the Panzer Battalion, which is kind of weird because the 2 of these just come from cups and that one comes from the cards, and it's not really explained anywhere. And it's also a little bit confusing because when you look at the cards for the regular cards that talk about replacement infantry, it calls it replacement infantry right on it, where this one calls it Panzer Battalion and it doesn't call it tank reinforcement, which tank reinforcements are what they're used throughout, putting them in the cup, and that's how they're referred to in the rules. So a little bit of a disconnect there. But that's basically the gameplay. You're going to be trying to, at some point, you're going to decide to go for it all, pick a zone, and start the Donnerschlag, and then you got to end up with units in that zone and in that zone in supply before the end of the game or by the end of the game. And then the Soviets have to kind of react to that. As I said, there becomes a point right around here where midfield, so to speak, where the other side is going to have a feeling, well, it's not here, it's not A, because they're all over here. They could go for B or C. Or if they're on this side of the board, it's A. It could be A or B, but not C. So the Soviets can respond to that. Again, it's not so easy, though, because their activations have to line up. They have to try to get their activations in. I found it really hard getting units on the board. There's reinforcements that come in for the Soviets on turns 2, 3, and 6, and 7. and the Germans have stuff come on the board on turn 4. I found it hard getting them on the board because of the activations and trying to get, clear out a zone and try to get them to where they need to go, because it's based on what activations you have available there. Again, and the Soviets have 3 different choices, usually 3 different choices on activation, and the Germans basically have the 2. There's also some other special rules that allow you to do some activations. There's this Schlackengut, and then that when the Germans start off with, when they use it, then it goes to the Soviets, but this always returns to them at the beginning of a turn. Then there's also, even after all my years of German, I'm butchering these. The Schwerpunkt, which allows you to activate units within 4 hexes of this, and helps you out with some activations. That's on the German side. And so it really is a game of activations and a little bit of bluffing. It really doesn't play too well solitaire, because you've got to pick these meeting zones. However, the activations and the combat cards, so there's some hidden information that you have to use. However, the activations, though, I tried just messing around, just pulling activations randomly and trying to do that, and that really makes it hard for whether side's doing that, whether you're doing that for the Germans or doing that for the Russians. It's pretty chaotic because you can't really get anything going there. But there is a way to kind of do some simulation of solitaire or AI with the activation deck. At least it's available there. But with the combat cards and with the picking these zones makes it a little bit harder to try to adapt that to solitaire play. So let's talk about a little bit about the game itself. The components are excellent. The board is mounted. It's very appealing. I like the look of the board. The cards are fine. They're a little thin, but they're still very usable. They're fine. They have a lot of information on it, but once you get into like the second or third turn, this becomes second hand of how you're doing this and how you're doing the activations. The counters are a little thin. They're standard for most counters. They pop out fine. You can see there's a little bit nibs on there, but there's really no need to. I don't usually clip counters. I do that on some games, but mainly like decision games and games like that have a nib issue. This one's really don't, and so I probably won't worry about that. You all might that clip counters, you probably have to do that, but they're fine. They're very colorful. There's a lot of information on there, as you can see. You get the combat factor, you get the formation. You've got the step there. If it's 2 dots, it's a couple of steps. If it's 1 black, then it's 1 step there. And then in the hex is the movement number. That's kind of appropriate, right? The movement is in a hex because you're moving in hexes. So it's got the information you need there. Again, this is an odds-based combat system with modified by the cards. The other player aids are very good. Very thick there. This is 2-sided. You have your extended play example, and then you have your combat charts on here and your sequence of play, a simplified sequence of play. You get 2 of those boards there, very thick, very good quality. And then you've got 2 setup cards. My Russians still have some stuff on it, but you've got the setup display here, which where you set everything out, and then the Germans reinforcements, and the Russians, call them again. The Soviets have a different group of reinforcements on the board. They're one-sided because they'll be right there on the board. So the player aids are awesome. There's also some alternative counters as well. I left those in the box, so to speak. But there's a silhouette on the tanks, and then there's kind of your typical picture of a tank. So they have an alternate counter. That confused me for a while too. It's 1 line at the very beginning of the rules. I was thinking, well, is this an extra step, or is there multiple steps, or where do these guys go? Well, no, this is just an alternative image for the counters on there. That you can use instead of the silhouette that's on there. And these are extra counters for another one of their games, Operation Theseus Gazala 1942. So I'm just leaving those in the box for now. There was one unit that wasn't on the setup, or on the, maybe it was on the reinforcements, that this unit right here was not listed on the reinforcements. I looked on BGG and it looks like this one should go with the 77 6M along with that. So that's something there that man, don't have very good lighting right there. So how's that? Is that better? So that one was not in there. A little bit of errata. There's always errata in this stuff. With that, let's talk about the rules. Rules are nicely laid out. This is full color, dual column, relatively easy to understand. However, I found a little nits, like that whole thing about calling tank reinforcements but calling them tank battalions on the cards, and not really explaining that, hey, it tells you to put these in the cup, but they didn't tell you anything about it. You have to kind of learn that by just pulling up the cards there. And I might have missed that, but that's basically how I found that out. If it's in the rules, I missed it. Also, the whole thing about picking when you do the Donnerschlag, that could have been explained a little bit better. There's a whole section on doing this Donnerschlag and putting that counter out, and then the countdown clock starts, and it talks about putting these meeting engagements. But it's the talking about the meeting engagements like up front in a small, buried in a paragraph, and then the whole Donnerschlag process is at the back of the rule book. They could have put those two together. That whole process should be explained a little bit better. It's kind of, it lives in a couple of different worlds, and it could have been a little bit clearer to explain that out. I played a lot of war games, so this and a lot of different war games, which is both a gift and a curse, because I get a lot of rules confused over time. But having my experience playing war games, some of the stuff I can pick up pretty easily, but I can see someone getting into this. This isn't a heavy game by any stretch. This is it's not really light, because you've got a lot of different mechanics with the activations, with the cards, and some of the other special rules going on. So and some chit draw. It's not easy or light, but it's not heavy. This would be a good, I think, mid-weight game for someone getting into it, especially if they're interested in this rescue attempt. The German forces trying to break out some German forces under siege in Stalingrad and trying to relieve them. Anybody interested in that would find this game, I think, very appealing and very interesting, especially the activation dynamics. But having said that, I didn't find the rules, looking at it from the standpoint of someone new to the game or to the hobby, I think they might struggle with this a bit, because it's not laid out all in one section. Like, here's the Donnerschlag section, but it doesn't say anything about the meeting zones here. That's up here in the very front. Talks about the meeting, up in the preparation for play, and is in the sequence of play. It talks about that. Well, that should all be together. Now, I know they probably didn't want to repeat themselves and try to keep the rules down, because the rules aren't that long, only about 10 pages. But pick a side, pick a place and put it in there. So that is a little, and there's a couple of things like that. There's like 2 or 3 things that I found, like I was kind of hunting around and trying to figure out where that fits, but I was able to get through it, and I was able to figure it out. There's a lot of historical notes. In fact, there's probably more historical notes than there is as much historical notes as there are rules, historical and designer notes, and then you have your setup here at the back. Which is, again, kind of weird. You have the setup at the front, then you have a setup at the back. So, and also found that the index wasn't, they don't, talking about, I was looking for that whole Soviet tank reinforcements, didn't find it in here under reinforcements. It didn't talk about it because I think it only lives on these 3 cards here. And again, that's fine, but just a little note there saying that you put that in a cup, and then they're going to come into play based on a card play. And there's some other stuff that comes in play based on card play. I think calling that out a little bit clearer would have been fine. Not trying to rag on it too much. I found it a very enjoyable game. I found it very aesthetically pleasing. It's very visually pleasing. The use of the cards and the gameplay with the combat cards and the activation is a very interesting and rewarding exercise. I can see playing this game multiple times and having it come out different, even though there's only 3 zones that you can go to, based on the activations and the combat cards. this whole scenario could come out differently each time, very differently, because of how you decide to activate stuff and how the combat cards come into play. I mean, not dramatically. I'm not saying this is limitless play. There's only so much that you can do with a static situation where the setup is always going to be the same for each of the forces. The reinforcements come in the same spot. So it has that standard fare that you have in most war games or simulations of it's going to play out somewhat historically, but what happens in the midfield with your cards and activations and how you choose what choices you make. Again, that's all what this is about, right? In order for if it's going to be a simulation, why you play it? Just read the book, right? If you want it to be a game, you have to have choices, and this does give you choices with the choosing activations, also choosing and how you move those cards, how you move the counters or the units based on the activations, and then using the combat cards and selecting when to use those combat cards and when. Those are all choices, so it does give you a rich environment or selection of choices in that regard. Anyway, that's what I decided to have to talk about you today. Again, whenever I get something in from a designer or a publisher, I want to thank them for it. I like to try to do as much content as I can on at least an unboxing, but then I also like to try to do, I want to get to the table, I want to play it a little bit. This is my second really kind of full playthrough. Actually might be my first full playthrough. I've played some partial playthroughs of messing around with the system a little bit, but I wanted to get my thoughts out, and I like to give my initial thoughts. So I try to get as much content out on something that has been sent to me. I feel like that's kind of my obligation. And I don't really pull punches. I mean, I say what I feel and what I think, and but that's up for you to decide. I mean, you might think my opinion is hogwash, and that's fine. I'm just a point of reference in that. And I might have some things wrong, and I might have gotten some of the rules wrong. Of course I did. Not might, I did. But that's my initial impressions. I hope you find it interesting. I hope you, with that, I hope you will consider checking out this game. I think it is an interesting looking game. It's an interesting system. This is an interesting company. This is my first one from VUCA Simulations. I might try more from this based on this, because as I said, the presentation is definitely above average, and definitely actually above good. I mean, there's some excellent, the player aids and some of the other stuff is very, very nice, very nicely done, high quality components. And the gameplay is intriguing. It's interesting. And don't let my comments on the rule book scare you off. I mean, you can get through it. I mean, I think they in trying to condense it down to 10 pages, I think they just tried to shorten or abbreviate some of the stuff. And I would have found it a little bit more useful. But then again, as I said, I read a lot of rule books all the time because I'm always playing something new. So I can miss things easily because I'm trying to go through a rule book and say, did I read that? And it might be 3 rules ago. Anyway, that's what I have for you today. Thanks for stopping by. I appreciate any time you spend with me, because I know your time is precious. So any amount of time you spend with me, listening to me go on, is greatly appreciated. Check out this game if any of this interests you. I'm going to try to get it to the table again and do a little bit more on it over time. But that's what I have for now. Thanks all, and have a great rest of the day. Thanks for watching.